everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. And today I am losing my mind over Sabrina Carpenter because everyone from conservative Christian men to young radical feminists are attacking her over an element of her dance routine she performed recently in Paris. And while usually this is the kind of thing I would just try to move on from, the discourse this time around is really sticking in my mind, and I need to talk about it before it destroys my brain. And if you are familiar with my channel, you can probably guess why that is, because basically anytime the alt-right and rad femmes are on the same side of an issue, I get concerned because it's almost always over something that directly relates to who I am as a person, and I don't like taking that sitting down. So, who is Sabrina Carpenter and what's been going on? What is the big deal? Why am I talking about this? So, first of all, Sabrina Carpenter. Like many pop stars, she is a Disney Channel alum who turned her popularity on the network into a music career. She's now been making music for over a decade and was most well known as one of the opening acts for Taylor Swift's Eras tour. But since the release of 2 lead singles from her most recent studio album, Short and Sweet, she's exploded in popularity. You've probably heard her on the radio, even if you don't know who she is. She's currently headlining her own international tour and won 2 Grammy Awards thanks to her work on Short and Sweet. I would also argue that no small part of her recent success is due not just to her songwriting, but also to her aesthetic rebranding. Since she stopped working with Disney-owned Hollywood Records, she's taken her look in a new direction, carving out a unique niche amongst other top acts in pop music. I describe her current look as a sort of gamine Barbie meets 60s Playboy bunny. And that vibe exists not just in her outfits, but in her music and music videos as well. And the cohesion between all three really works. This is all to say how she acts, looks, and dances on stage is no accident. She is not a typical Disney kid rebelling for the sake of it. She's seemingly come into her own and finally found a style that suits her and that she feels confident in as a performer. She's flirty, feisty, is great in interviews, and isn't afraid to talk about sex or relationships in her music, though she rarely does so in overtly crass terms. In case you can't tell, I'm a little bit of a Sabrina fan myself, which probably colors at least a little bit of my reaction to what's been brewing online about her. And if you just went by some of the third-hand comments shared about her stage presence, though, you'd think that what she was doing was intentionally trying to commit full sex acts on stage in front of children, which, that is not what's happening here. So, anyway, that is who Sabrina is. I was starting to get a little bit ahead of myself. What exactly is the internet mad about right now? Well, at a recent performance in Paris, as part of her choreography, for a couple of seconds, she entered what one might call an Eiffel Tower position with 2 of her dancers. This is shock, horror, oh my goodness, a reference to an adult position with the same name. One partner in the middle between 2 people, you get the idea. And seemingly, the second a clip of this hit the internet, people were up in arms about it. I was surprised not to see as many people making, "What about the children in the audience?" points, as that is mostly what has happened in the past. And we don't really need to go into that in too much detail, but for reference, a couple of months ago, virtually the same kind of moment happened because somebody posted a clip of her singing into the microphone from her knees while on stage in a way that may have resembled certain adult acts. And that time around, the controversy focused on parents being aghast that she would expose their kids to sexuality in that way. And if that is the problem, well, I'd recommend they look a bit more closely at the lyrics next time before buying expensive concert tickets for their elementary schooler. And lest anyone say, "Oh, but isn't she a Disney Channel star? She should be more aware of her audience." The only live-action show she was on that I know of ran from 2014 to 2017, so anyone who was 8 to 10 years old during the first season of that show is now an adult. The vast, vast majority of her current fan base are adult women, and there's no evidence to the contrary. I mean, look, people bring their 12-year-olds to metal shows. Unless it's an adult-only venue, you can't really stop people bringing their kids to shows that they probably shouldn't. And in my opinion, it's more on the parents for not double-checking that the thing they want to bring their kid to meets their personal standards of what's appropriate. I don't think it should be on the star for not catering every song and dance move to the youngest and most sensitive possible member of a crowd. In my humble opinion, at least. But I guess the old, won't somebody think of the children stick didn't work well enough, so people had to find a new angle of attack this time. The best way I can think of to summarize that new angle is this. Sabrina Carpenter is damaging the feminist movement and promoting the subjugation of women by performing degrading acts on stage. And a lot of people, especially younger liberal feminist women, agreed with this. Now, this particular reaction is nothing new. For as long as there has been pop music, people have been deriding it for damaging the moral character of the youth, or being too sexual or the like. I mean, heck, even going back into history with jazz music, that was a thing too. People wrote about this in homemaker magazines, and now they're writing about it on Twitter. But in this decade, things are pivoting. As we've talked about in some of my other previous videos, like the public's reaction to CNC kinks, it's not just conservative Christian homemakers who are angry about this. It's self-described radical feminists resurrecting dead talking points from the 1980s getting mad about this. Some of the most popular tweets critiquing Sabrina's performance read, quote, "We're back to the being hypersexual and male-centered is liberating and quirky era I see," and, quote, "This is female sexuality," but she's referencing the Eiffel Tower where two men are the ones deriving pleasure. She's glorifying an institution built on our dehumanization. Call me a conservative misogynist if you want, but there's nothing liberatory about repackaging submission as empowerment. And another favorite, quote, "You guys need to stop acting like heterosexual sex positions, especially ones that put women in a submissive role, are in some way an act of feminism." And y'all, when I say that these are the halfway normal takes, I mean it. We'll talk about some of the truly off-the-rail ones later, but yes, to some people, Sabrina's dance moves represent subjugation to the patriarchy, based on the belief, seemingly, that that particular sexual position is inherently submissive and all about male pleasure. Well, fun fact, the only time I've ever seen this position done in person, it was between three women, and they were holding hands and having a great time. I suspect they'd say because those women were using straps, and thus they were trying to play the male role or something, they're still reenacting the patriarchy while having what was in fact a lesbian threesome with no men involved. But that's the kind of conclusion this logic will lead you to. But before I get to any more robust arguments, however, I feel compelled to point to a few petty things, like there's nothing about the Eiffel Tower that is inherently submissive or degrading. It can be, if you play it that way. It can also be about the person in the middle being the queen bee who's directing her two partners to do what she wants them to do. She could be doing CBT in there. She could be fighting on that penis. We don't know. You really don't know. Not to mention, if you want to look at a threesome arrangement that's focused on male pleasure, the stereotype is an FFM threesome, not an MMF threesome. Do I need to remind the rad femmes about the evils of performative lesbianism and bisexuality for the male gaze? I thought they hated that. Like, not to be too much of a sex haver on the internet or anything, but as far as I'm aware, if you're doing an MMF threesome, it is way more likely to be about the woman's pleasure because of how much work cishet men have to do to get around their fear of being perceived as being homosexual in order to agree to do it. But I guess if any kind of penis is involved anywhere in this process, in any number, it's anti-feminist. And perhaps most obviously of all, I seriously wonder if a lot of these rad femmes realize that women who are attracted to men can like having sex with them. Like, as far as sexual positions go, the Eiffel Tower is far from being something that only the man can enjoy. Lots of people like sex standing up. Lots of people like vaginal penetration. Lots of people like giving their partner's head. Heck, with the right attitude, I bet you could even work some external stimulation in there. No problem. It's like the wires got crossed somewhere, and the well-meaning point that not all women can get off with penetration alone got turned into all women actually hate being penetrated, and the mere act of being penetrated is servile and humiliating implicitly. It echoes a lot of the sentiment you hear from pickup artists and manosphere types who coach men to believe women don't really enjoy sex and just use sex as a way to get money and status from men. But hearing this from other women it makes me sad. Like, I don't want to seem like I'm boiling this down to you haven't had good sex yet, because that's not it. But I cannot think of a clearer example of what happens when you don't have good sex ed and you aren't encouraged to figure out what works for you. And as a result, you believe your experience is representative of how every woman really feels, just because you don't like the idea of this position, or don't like penetration, or don't like men, doesn't mean other women don't like those things. I'm not so sure what's so hard to grasp about that. Like, if anything, the denial that women can experience positive sexual pleasure from heterosexual sex plays right into the hands of the arch conservatives you'd think rad femmes would despise, because if women don't like sex anyway, in their minds, it's okay to treat it like a chore and an obligation, and why bother trying to make it feel good at all? It's not like that would be possible anyway. Is it not the prevailing narrative among certain far-right figures that women should only have sex for procreation and get nothing out of it otherwise? Why on earth would you agree with that as a feminist? Conservatives are afraid of women discovering that they can have agency and sexual pleasure because that might encourage them to advocate for themselves or set boundaries or expect something from their partner in return. Of course, they do try to co-opt women's pleasure and sexuality to suit their own aims, but by and large, they are most afraid of women having sexual autonomy and will do anything to stop it. The route to get there might be different, but ultimately a lot of rad femmes are disturbingly aligned with this end goal, the denial of individual women having sexual autonomy. Conservatives want to deny that because women having any kind of autonomy threatens their whole deal, and I guess rad femmes want to deny it because of some nebulous concern about women liking sex the wrong way damaging the movement. Either way ends in guilt and shame for individual women, which is an isolating and controlling set of emotions. And I feel like I really need to emphasize, women who are attracted to men cannot just stop being attracted to them. They can't just stop liking having sex with men. What exactly are they supposed to do to have correct sex? Who checks if they're having correct sex? Who grants them approval? And if they can't be lesbians, and if they don't want to display their sexuality in the exact way that's prescribed, should they just be abstinent? I am genuinely asking what solution is the end game here, because it sounds kind of like that's what's required. And I'm wondering what sort of tyranny that's reminding me of, but that is not where the comparisons to conservatism stop. Oh, no. Remember those wild takes I mentioned a moment ago? Let's talk about some of those now, and where do we even begin with these? As with anything online, we should take all of this with a massive grain of salt because we don't really know if it's real or not. But having been through dialogue like this a couple of times now, I don't think these are just trolls making up positions for attention. When someone calls Sabrina Carpenter a glorified prostitute, or says she's letting everyone know she's a slut, and a bunch of other people who are allegedly feminists have similar takes, the only thing I can think is, oh, we haven't fixed anything. Women enjoying sex are seen as whores, and that's bad because sex work is evil and wrong, and women become dirty and worthless when they have sex with a man.
Hi everyone, Editing Evie here. So I just want to clarify a little bit more why I find this so frustrating, because of course on the internet women are going to be called all of these words, so why does it irk me when a radical feminist in particular is saying these words about another woman? And I'm not going to get into a whole rundown of like what the political beliefs of radical feminists are, but suffice to say that the core of it is supposed to be about understanding the sexual dynamics between men and women and how inescapable these things are, to the point that essentially any penetrative sex between a man and a woman in a heterosexual context is tantamount to assault because of that larger context. And it's very strange to me that if it's supposed to be about the dynamics of the patriarchy, are you not recreating that exact oppression and using the tools of patriarchy when you're calling another woman terms like slut or whore? Because to me, that sounds an awful lot like trying to keep another woman in line within the current hegemonic ideal of femininity.
And that's where these takes really fully go off the rails. At least one person thought you couldn't get out of the Eiffel Tower position once you got into it, and therefore it's like assault and rape, and that is just not how sex works. It doesn't become an inescapable trap automatically. Sex is dangerous, not because necessarily the physical positions you get into, but because the people doing it to you might not care about your consent, or they might mean to harm you. Any position can be used to hurt you. Rough, penetrative sex can be loving and safe. Outercourse with your clothes on can turn into assault. No matter how fluffy, simple, or shallow you make sex, it can still be dangerous. It depends on the people you're doing it with, and equating just more advanced sexual techniques with assault misses where the real danger lies. Trust me, I have a lot of sympathy for people who have irrationally emotional responses online, but that doesn't entitle someone to fearmonger and spread misinformation to potentially hundreds or thousands of people. If thinking about someone else consensually engaging in a pantomime while fully clothed makes you think about being trapped and assaulted to the point of it being a trauma trigger, I would say that's a red flag that some psychotherapy work might be useful there. Seems like a totally disproportionate response, in my humble opinion at least. I feel like we should take a second to maybe get grounded in reality again. We are talking about a few seconds long clip of someone performing a suggestive dance move while in a non-revealing cutesy stage costume with 3 pairs of lycra on as a consenting adult woman. And that, for some reason, is making people declare participating in certain sex acts is tantamount to participating in your own assault. Because if you haven't noticed, we're not really talking about Sabrina Carpenter here. We're talking about what she represents, and then arguing about what random individual women are allowed to do or not in order to stay feminist. And there's a point I haven't even gotten to yet, which is the idea that, but this isn't feminist, this isn't making a political statement. And why does she need to be making that to do a stage performance? I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong here and I've missed something, I don't think Sabrina Carpenter is marketing herself as a leader of feminism, or that her music is feminist or revolutionary or is going to bring about empowerment to women. It's empowerment to women in the way that any other kind of pop music is empowering to women. That's not the crux of why she makes the music she does. It's not the cornerstone of the marketing. It's just she makes fun pop music for the girlies, and it's not trying to be a massive political thing. So judging it by that ruler seems a bit misplaced. I feel like it's maybe a good idea not to expect your pop music artists to be cultural thought leaders for feminism. When has that ever happened? Ever? Like, is that a thing? I don't think so. So no, I am not trying to make Sabrina Carpenter into a philosopher. I do not need her to be part of the vanguard of feminism. She makes music and it's fun, and there you go. But let's get back to talking about some of the wilder points I saw around this. Like, one person declared that she was having a train ran on her. Like, where? When did that happen in the clip? I missed it if it was there. Yeah, another popular response claimed the clip was helping to normalize sexual abuse. And please, explain to me how a woman smiling and enjoying herself while getting into a suggestive pose of her own free will is normalizing abuse. The only conclusion I can come to is that a disturbing number of people have internalized the Puritan cultural fear of sex and mistaken it for a legitimate political belief. Otherwise, I have no explanation for why so many folks seem to believe any kind of sex with a man, no matter how much you want it or seem to like it or what pleasure you say it brings you, is actually wrong and bad and hurtful to other women. And you might say, oh, but they only had a problem with the submissiveness of the position. Those are the parts that are degrading, not sex on the whole. You just have to be dominant. And there's nothing superior about supposedly dominant sexual positions or acts either. Some women like being on top, sure, but you're just as likely to run into a guy who's pushy, trying to get you into that position because that's what he likes. Not to mention, if Sabrina was using her stage performance to simulate more dominant acts over men, I think the radfems would simply have a problem with it from a different angle. It's bad because she's trying to appeal to the male gaze. It's representing a dominatrix fantasy, which is centered around men's pleasure. Pegging is just taking on the role of a man. Whatever. And I know this because this is the exact problem radfems have with actual prodoms. They're acting against their nature to please men. They're simply following a script written for them by men according to their own fantasies. All of that stuff. There's basically no way for Sabrina to win in their eyes unless she stops making the kind of music she does, stops dancing on stage, and I guess starts to wear boxy pantsuits 24/7. Is this the world radfems want? A world with no public representation of female sexuality except what they approve of, lest the men enjoy it? And what would that be even? Loving, romantic, monogamous lesbian sex with no penetration and no risque clothing or poses that might look too much like what a man might like or might resemble what the heterosexuals do too much? The whole reason this died off in the 80s is because it's too restrictive and repressive. You can't achieve liberation by shoving other women into progressively smaller boxes of acceptability. You can't make them not want to have sex with men if they're attracted to them. It simply doesn't work at scale, and it is cruel and contrary to human nature. The logical endpoint of this strain of radical feminism is seemingly complete abstinence and no expression of human sexuality, either in public or in private, outside of two things. And forget about representation in art or music, lest you inadvertently recreate the patriarchy in even tiny ways. While they deride liberal choice feminists for being too self-focused or not seeing the impact their choices can have on the collective, many Western radical feminists are just as focused on the individual, in my opinion. Except they tend to focus on what wrong choices an individual can make, chiding them for not self-sacrificing enough, demanding women be accountable for their sins against all of womankind. Radical feminism is not the opposite of choice feminism. It's avoiding wrong choice feminism. I think in a world that has to deal with the likes of Andrew Tate and a backsliding of rights writ large, it's normal for young people to find comfort in philosophies that promise new perspectives and answers. but freedom for women will not be won by scolding other women for having sex in the wrong way because you don't like it. If you want to think collectively, actually think collectively. Focus on the systems, not individual people, and policing them. Actually kill the cop in your brain. Because if you look at that, you will see Sabrina Carpenter is not your enemy. The women having threesomes with their boyfriends they enjoy are not your enemy. The actual enemy is right next to you right now, agreeing with you the whole way that these women are disgusting sluts who need to be punished. And they are overjoyed. You are spending your energy debating pop stars on the internet while they try to overturn no-fault divorce and defund medical services for women. That's why I talk about this stuff. Why it really gets to me, because I know that so many of these women mean well and do want what is best for other women and for themselves. And they're tired of what they see on social media. They're tired of them and their friends being pressured into things they don't want to do or being expected to perform femininity in a certain way. And they think they found one of the culprits when what they've actually found is one of the symptoms. And if we could just all get on the same page and pool our collective willpower for change or just like one single thing, we might be able to make things better. But we can't do that because we're going to stay fractured as long as arguing about whether Sabrina Carpenter is sufficiently modest or not counts as radical feminist praxis. And I know, the internet's not real life, but for so many of the young people absorbing these ideas and repeating them, the internet is their life. It is their whole social circle. It is how they protest, it's how they find new ideas, and the longer we pretend things on the internet don't matter or are less real, the longer we will be behind the eight ball on that one. That's why drama like this isn't really just drama. It's a temperature check, and it tells us a little bit about where other people are at and what they're thinking about. And this temperature check gave us yet another worrying result. And to be honest, I am not sure what the answer is here. I don't know how to fight the current political tides or the hell that is social media or the failure of public sex ed. I don't know what to do now that we have a generation of young people who have experienced an internet without segregated adult and children's spaces, who are traumatized and afraid. But I am pretty sure I know the answer is not bash other women on the internet for liking sex with men the wrong way. As I said before, I have a lot of empathy for people who react strongly to stuff like this. We live in a culture where violation is the norm and not the exception. Of course, some people are going to project their trauma onto other people's situations or come up with weird heuristics to attempt to avoid more pain and suffering for themselves. And the feeling I am left with at the end, again, is not anger, it's sadness. I am sad for these people, these women who are hurting and who don't get the support or answers they need. I feel for those people who are afraid, because why wouldn't they be? Ignorance and lack of education bring fear. When you don't know if you can trust people, if you don't know how to keep yourself safe, you come up with rules to try and promise yourself safety so you can relax. But life doesn't work that way, because the problem isn't women doing sex wrong. It's a societal structure in which all women are not free to express the full, genuine spectrum of sexuality without patriarchal interference, be they milkmaid trad wives or suggestive pop stars. And until all women can be free to be who they are without fear, sexually and otherwise, we will all suffer. And focusing on pop stars and their dance routines is missing the forest for the trees. And I imagine that I am largely preaching to the choir on this one. I imagine that most people in my audience will understand the points I make before I've even made them in this video, but that's where things are at. And I struggle sometimes because I don't want to be seen as like a drama commentary YouTuber. I don't think that's the bulk of what I do, but the more we stray into this new wave of Puritanism coming from multiple sides, the more I do feel like it is worthwhile to say, hey, like, pay attention to this. Notice that this is going on. This is not just a one-off weird thing because people don't like Sabrina Carpenter and it's a Stan War thing. This, to me, is representative of a tide that we have seen coming for quite a while. We know from many other previous videos that I've made and from other general things you may know about online that especially Gen Z and younger tend to be more sex negative. They don't want to see sex in their movies. They don't want to see it in their media. They just generally have more sex negative beliefs and attitudes and are less likely to have sex. And also, a big part of their formative years would have existed at a time where their schooling was interrupted, where they probably didn't get any sex ed at all, because if they were not getting it in-person schooling, they were almost assuredly not getting it from their parents. And if they did find anything, it was probably from peers online. And again, I'm not sure what the solution is. I don't know what the next steps are. I am not a thought leader by any means. I'm just here to point stuff out and be like, hey, I can see why people agree with this idea of, acting a certain way on stage is like influencing young people, and that can be damaging. I do think there is a grain of truth in the idea that obviously younger people replicate what they see influencers do and pop stars do. That's, been true as long as fame has existed. But I don't think that that is the underlying problem. I don't think that is in any way the source. And continuing to focus on that, I think, is maybe not the best possible thing for actually moving forward. And I'm concerned that the people who want to be the vanguard of feminism are happily agreeing with people that would subjugate them and make them all basement housewives randomly assigned to an incel if given like half the chance. So I don't know. It just seems weird to me. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about this one in a comment down below. If you saw this on social media, if you didn't, what did you think about this? What were your reactions? Do you agree, disagree, whatever? Let me know again in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this and already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related subjects, as well as pop culture news, human sexuality, LGBT plus issues, and the like. And finally, if you really want to support what I do, the best way to do this is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, it means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.